Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Percona Community Live 2022. My name is Ducos, and I will be presenting a talk about MyDumper. So what is this talk about? Actually, MyDumper has changed a lot in the last 1.45 years. So we are going to be reviewing the features that we add to MyDumper. We are going to be a high-level review. We are going to also review the new use cases that those features give us. And also we are going to be reviewing the enhancements that are going to be added on future releases, and how, of course, they are going to be impacting on the performance and the usability of this amazing tool. So the first question here is, what is MyDumper? Actually, this project was started for Thomas Mituzas in 2009 with the first release, which was the 0.1. MyDumper is just a MySQL multi-threaded logical backup tool. The difference is with the other software on the MySQL environment is that it's multi-threaded. Nowadays, it's something common, but when MyDumper was released, initially there was no tool like that. So it has a lot of impact on the community, and also as it was multi-threaded, it was much faster than the only option that we have at the moment, that it was MySQL dump. So another thing that I want to clarify is that MyDumper is an open source and maintained by the community. It's not a Percona tool or MariaDB or a MySQL product. This is from the community. You will see that there are the logo of Percona. That is because I work for Percona, but MyDumper is just maintained by the community. Another thing that I would like to clarify is that MyDumper, just the name of MyDumper with a capital M and D, that is the name of the project I wanted to use as like the brand. And then we have MyDumper and MyLoader with lowercase, which is actually the tools that we are using. So first of all, who I am. Okay, I'm David Ducos. I have 39 years old. I live in Argentina. I studied computer science. I had a degree on computer engineer from the University of La Plata. So I have been working since 2009. So I have been working with MySQL for the last 14 years. I started with a small company here in Argentina, which is a consulting company, which calls consulting. Then another 3 years in OLX, which is an online classified company. And then finally, for the last 8 years in Percona. So how we end up here? Actually, on September of 2020, Max Bobinic, the previous maintainer of MyDumper, just asked me if I was interested in MyDumper. And I told him that honestly, I was interested in MyDumper for a long time. And that was all. There was no interview or anything else. It was just asking me that if I wanted, I say yes, and that was it. So why do I love it? Actually, there are 3 things that I love about MyDumper. One is that it's related to MySQL. I'm a MySQL DBA for a long time, so it's something that I love. Then these are multi-threaded programming, and it's very complex, but it's really interesting because there are all the times new things that you need to solve, new problems that you need to solve, and in a multi-threaded way is something really interesting from my point of view. And of course, it is written on C. There are people that love to program in Python, Perl, or whatever. I like to write in C. So that is why I love it. Now let's back to MyDumper. So let's start with the past of MyDumper. The idea of this part is to review some of the features that we add, and also to explain how did we do to back this project back to life. It's not just about MyDumper, it's also my personal experience, just to know that probably there are going to be some technical details that are going to be missed. So the first version that I released was on 2021, on January 2021. It was the 0.10.1. At this point, I had no experience on a project, a development project. So because mostly in my career, I have been working as a VA, so I performed no change in the code. And from September to January, I had to understand the MyDumper building process. That was really, really important for me. I took that time in order to understand the whole process. And I didn't perform any change in the code. It was impossible at the time for me to understand the changes that were needed. So, but what I did is I took the decision of removing support for L6, and I add Boston and Bionic, which were not there at the time of the last release, which was like 1.5 years before the time. So I released the first one, and then on March of 2021, I released the version 0.10.3. At that point, I started to merge code. There was a lot of things that were as a pull request, which I add. But I still was not the owner of the whole project. So I was able to review this and understand the code. And I performed some changes. Also, I had to ask Max at that point to merge the code, because I was not fully, I was not the full owner of the project as I am right now. I also started to focus more on my loader, because my loader at that point, actually, it is a good tool. I mean, at that point, it was a good tool. The performance was pretty good. And but my loader, they need a lot of love. So I focus more on my loader. So that's why we are going to see that most of the change at the beginning were related to my loader. So I started on May of 2021, the version 0.10.5 was released. I started to write my own code. At that point, there was not a lot of things that I have been doing. I mean, I have been merging old code, but not my own code. So at that point, I take the ownership, the full ownership of the project in terms of development. So I started to add and find things that I wanted to MyDumper to have. For instance, one simple thing that I did was the password obfuscation, or adding the push mode. These are just a couple of examples of what I did, or what are the things that I add to the project, which I thought that were going to be really, really useful. Of course, there was several bugs that we have fixed, and we started refactoring tasks. We need to understand that as MyDumper has been there for a long time, the code was pretty old, and in order to implement the new features, we need to change a lot of things, things that had not been changed for a long, long time. None of the change that we did at that moment has a performance benefit. I mean, we were just moving code, and try to make it to fix bugs, but no performance benefits at the point. So in July of 2021, with the version 0.10.7, we are starting to things that are going to improve the performance. So in order to my loader to be better, we have to give more information, and that is why we add the metadata file per table. Now, before that, my loader didn't know the amount of data that is going to be inserted. After that, my loader will know how much rows are going to be inserted, and in order to import the largest table first, that is the only way that we have to know the amount of rows beforehand, and we did that in my loader, and now on MyDumper, and my loader will know that. Then there were a couple of features that were released. We add some features that were easy to implement. Those were the word support, the disable read log, the rest sync wait, and the order by primary key were some of the features that I say, okay, this is really simple to implement in my loader and MyDumper, so let's do it. The one that was not easy, but it was really useful is the checksum. The checksum of the table. That is really useful, and was the first step in order to perform the tests in a better way. This is another thing that we have been working a lot lately, which is to have better testing. That is something that we want to have in the future releases, to have more stable releases, and for that we need things like the checksum of the tables. And of course, the first important performance impact feature was the artifact integration. At that point, the tables were being created with all the indexes. Since we implement this feature, now the indexes are creating after the whole table data is inserted. So that was at that time was the first performance impact feature. So on September of 2021, we released the version 0.11.1. This was a release that performed changes, very important. That is why we changed from 10 to 11. The main reason why we changed the number is because we implement the database and table file renaming. That is something that we had to do in order to support all the file lengths that MySQL allows to have, but at OS level is going to fail. So we had to start renaming the tables and the databases names. So we keep a hash table inside MyDumper in order to keep track of that. My loader, on the other hand, needs to know if that was a renamed table, and of course change the name or keep the information internally, checking the file name, checking the file content. So another change that we did at that point was related to the estimated state. There was some logic in the code that was not being used, so that is why we perform some changes in the code, and we create the shows accordingly. Another change important was the configuration file. We are starting to use the configuration file to set the variables, the session level variables that we have, because there were a lot of requests that they want to execute at session level, or change things at session level. So we decided to stop doing that on configuration file in the code, and start using the configuration file, and that was it. Another interesting feature is the parallel table creation. So it was very simple. Previous to this, MySQL was creating, MyDumper was creating the tables one after the other one in a sequential order. So we decided that it was possible to do it in parallel. I mean, we are a multi-threaded tool, so it was the logic to do it in parallel. And then we have to disable that because on some scenarios, if you have the foreign key creation on the newer version of MySQL, you have issues. So even though that you can do it in parallel, in certain scenarios, you might not need it or want it. So you are allowed to disable that. Then there were a lot of work, refactoring work. There were duplicate pieces of code, unnecessary logic. We had to unwrap code. We created new functions, and we had been splitting the code. Actually, we were making more mess just to understand what we are doing, and then fix all that mess. For sure, we have been adding more structures, lists, and hashes, as we need to understand better, to be able to, I mean, to build the code in order to be able in the future to add more logic and features. At that point, we knew that if we continue doing things just patching, it will not make sense. So we tried to add better code in order to allow MyDumper, the project per se, to grow. All those changes that we need at that point, some of those changes were introduced in that release. On November of 2021, we released the version 0.11.3. It was a very good release in terms of the features that we had. The stream was one of them. This was like another feature that impacts in the performance, and of course, it opened new use cases, because now you can start to restore while the backup is running. The other features that we add that impacts in the performance is the CSTD, because it's reduced the amount of I/O needed to write all the whole data, and of course the speed of backups is much faster than GZIP, which was the other implementation that we have in MyDumper, and it's like a real-time compression, so it's much faster. Another thing that CSTD gives us is that as we were writing at faster and using less disk space, then you can start increasing the amount of threads on the MyDumper side. So that is another thing that you might need to consider now that you're allowed to use CSTD, that you can even increase the amount of threads on MyDumper. So another thing that we started at the time is the data masquerade functionality. So we implement that in several phases. Actually, there is one phase that we need to implement on future releases in order to fully implement the data masquerade. And of course, there are a lot of bugs that we have been fixing. We reach up to 5 releases for bug fixes. And that is because we didn't have enough testings on the releases. On December of 2021, we implement the partitioning, the split partitioning. I don't know how useful is it, but there was for a long time it was in the pull request list, so I wanted to implement it package it for people that they need. Then what we did, which was really important, is to add better logging information. So there are many jobs in the queue. It was things that we add to so the user can check how much data needs to be inserted or executed or reviewed. Also, we add the version of the software on the backup, because if not, you didn't know which was the version, because we don't have the backward compatibility. So you need to know what version the backup was taken in order to import with the right version. Then the late tracking error, that is another thing that is really useful when you was importing the data. It was if an error occurs, you didn't know what exact line of the file, because the failure were related to the insert statement executed, not in the file. It was just for the insert, and you know that you could have multiple inserts in a single file in MyDumper. We also add the load option, the load data option, and the CSV. But in the way that we implemented, you will be able to write probably every format that you want in order to output the data. We also integrate with Circle CI and Docker, which was really important because there are users that they want to use Docker for their environment. And MyDumper didn't have his own deployment or container. And Circle CI was really useful, and we are introducing more functionality to Circle CI because we want to start performing the test when we are pulling a new code to the repository. So the testing, and that includes all the testing. So not just compiling, it's also the test that we want to perform. Also, okay, then on March of 2022, which was one previous before the last one, we implement a lot of features. With the annotated function for that Masquerade, we started the second phase there, and we finished that. At that point, we were able to get the information from the configuration file. We add the stop and resume, which need a bit of love, but at least it is there. So now if you press Ctrl+C and the backup is being restored, you might not need to cancel the whole thing. You can just resume and continue, but if you want to stop it, you're allowed to do that. So also the compression, we added the compression for temporary files when we are streaming, because that you weren't allowed to do that before. It was just the SQL file, non-compressed files, non-compressed backups were allowed to use with the stream. That last change, but was just for temporary files. So at the end, when you were streaming, it was just non-compressed data. So it was like 3 steps to get to the final stream and compression functionality. We also add filtering options on MyLoader. So you have the same things on MyDumper, but you can also skip the trigger or skip the post. So it was like you can filter on MyLoader too. We also add the functionality to combine -R and -F. That one is for chunk by rows, and -F is to chunk by file size. So now you could have both, which is really useful if you have multi-column primary key. Also, the pause when there was not enough disk space. So and logging the transmission rate. That's also other functionality that we add, because we wanted the user to have more information about the backup. Also to know what's going on, it was to take their own metrics. And as we did the parallel table creation, we need to the sequential table creation, because we found that there were some issues related to the foreign keys on MySQLite. Also, we started refactoring tasks in order to split MyLoader. MyLoader at that point, we had a lot of functionality, and the file size was reaching to the 3,000 lines. And we say, no, this is getting too big, and it started to split on several files. And then the latest release, which was on May of 2022, is the version 0.12.3. It has the full compression support on stream. This is extremely useful because now you are just copying the files and we are sending the file completely through the stream. We are not changing anything else in the file content. There was some refactoring on the DDL locking. We had to review all the lock mechanism that we have. Also, we started using Bygreen to review the memory leaks, and that is something that we are going to start using. We are going to try to use on every release. And we're starting to split MyDumper, because we already split MyLoader on the previous release, and we found that it was really useful. And then we started to with the same process on MyDumper. We just split the code, but we try to maintain the logic of the offsets in each file. And the other thing that we add is the support for PMM to show users what MyDumper was doing, MyDumper and MyLoader, because it is on both. So you might end up with graph like this on PMM, which is really interesting. We are using the file collection for doing this kind of graphs. Okay, so now the new use cases. So all the features that have been added allow us to give you new use cases. So we already reviewed what we have been doing on these last releases. So now we are going to review the new use cases, what those features allow us to do. And those new cases are given by string, and also with Masquerade, which is not fully implemented, but we wanted to share what are the opportunities here. So before stream, we have the common use case that MyDumper connects to the database, write the data on the file system, and then MyLoader is going to read from the file system and connect to the database. There are multiple scenarios, and you can have that. The only difference, for instance, are if you need to copy from one server to the other one. But then it's the same. You are just reading from the file system to import the data. With the stream, there is another opportunity that is that you can start the backup, start the restore, even if the backup is running. So MyDumper connects to the database. MyDumper is going to write the data on the file system. But after the file has been closed, and remember that you have chunks per file, as soon as the file is closed, the file name is going to be pushed in the stream queue, which the stream thread is going to read, is going to open the file and pipe to standard output. That is how we implement the stream functionality. So we need the file system, yes. And we are streaming to the other server, which is going to be creating a new file, and it's going to store the data, and it's going to enqueue on the process, but depend on the file, the kind of file that we have, if it is schema data or a foreign or a trigger or whatever. It's going to determine when that file needs to be executed. So my loader is going to just, at the end, is going to read the file and import or execute the commands inside the file. So as you can see, there are new scenarios that were impossible before, and there is an interesting one, which is that we can keep my loader hidden from the network using NC, and multiple execution of MyDumper can send files to my loader in order to import data in parallel. So that's another thing that we didn't have in the past. It was impossible to think that my loader was going to be able to read files on the fly and import, and that you can, that you could have multiple execution on MyDumper. It was like crazy. At this point, this is really useful because you can just this is useful for QA environments, for development, if you want to create these pieces of tables on the other environments. This is a way to do it, and do it really fast with MyDumper and of course with my loader. Even though you can do it, use my loader if you want to load data on a production, even though from your application, just you need to take into account the format that we are using, which is the file name, and then there is insert statements. Then about Masquerade, this is something that MyDumper was not designed for. It is something that is for, again, for developers to build new environments. It works. We try to do it as simple as possible. So we perform the select as we are using for any export, and then this is how MyDumper works. It creates a MySQL row with data structure. There is a function that is executed and modify the data inside the MySQL row, and then we insert that data on the files as we do on every execution. So this is really simple. Right now, the function executed on every single execution of MyDumper is the identity function, which is the one that returns the same value that you are passing as argument. So it's really simple. But the idea is to add other functions that are going to be modifying the data and actually changing the content. One really useful thing that we want to add to this is the option to keep a hash of the data. I mean, every time that we ping to this value, I mean, we want to access this value, the value returned is going to be all the time this one. So this is really interesting in order to keep the cardinality of the data. As for instance, every time that you try to access the ID number 3, which will match to ID number 5 on your destination database, keep track of that. So every time that you see on your database the value 3, it's going to be the number 5 is going to be returned and written on the backup. Well, now I wanted to go a bit deeper on the important features that we add and the impacts on the performance. Those are stream, CSTD, the Innodb files in the creation, and the product table creation. So streams allows import while export is running. This is really useful, and if you need to start your restore as soon as possible. I consider that this is less steps, so allows you to reduce the copy from one place to the other one, and as you can do it in parallel, is just much simpler. It's just less step and in parallel. Another good thing is that can be combined with other options like compression and file index creation. So that is, I consider that is really useful how we implement and that we are able to do that. Another thing which is important is that now you can send everything to a single file, which was one awful thing MyDumper has, that a lot of files were going to be created. So in this way, we are reducing the amount of files that are going to be created. CSTD, it was really easy to implement CSTD. We use just a GZIP wrapper. We didn't have much on the code, just we added the wrapper and we linked the library, and that was it. Another thing is that speed up the backup. We are talking about 50% of the time less. I mean, it's incredibly fast, and of course there is less data to write or to transmit if you're having in the network, or if you want to store it, it's going to be less disk space needed if it is compressed. So same time, sorry, less time, compress it. So it's a win-win scenario. So in Innodb fast index creation, we implemented this on MyLoader. Nothing was changed on MyDumper. On MyLoader, we are creating, we have the first step, that is create the table without any indexes. Then we need to create 2 jobs to create the indexes and to create the foreign keys, which are not created at the same time. This is really useful on large table with a lot of indexes. As if you insert on a table with a lot of secondary indexes, it might take more time when more rows are inserted. So what we are doing, which is something that we all already know, but that we are inserting all the data at once, and then we are creating the index in a second stage. Another thing is that you can create the indexes I mean, you start with inserts on one table, and after all the inserts have been executed, you start the alter table on that particular table. But meanwhile, you can insert on another table. That is really useful we also have the option to insert when all the inserts can be executed. The idea is also to implement per an amount of threads. I mean, you can have, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 alter tables that are adding the index at the same time, but not all the thread working on the alter tables. So that is another thing that we need to add, which is not released yet. The parallel table creation, that is, I want to point out this because it was really, really useful for the database with a lot of small tables. But the other thing to take into account is that this might have issues with foreign keys. So that is why we had to implement the serializer. So you are allowed to create the tables in parallel, which is desired for most of us. But as there is an issue, we need to also to disable this functionality. So if you are not foreign keys, you are free of any issue. If not, you might need to take this into account. So I wanted to let you know that set a couple of tips. For instance, how to speed up dumps. I already told you, but MyDumper is not one of the tools that we had to improve the performance too much. Probably the functionality, but not the performance, because the performance is quite good. So what you need to take into account in order to do not have performance issues is to use -r, which is the option that splits the files per row. I mean, the amount of shops at database level. The idea in the future is to determine the best chunk size based on the query time. That is one of the features I wanted to add to MyDumper. And also taking into account the minimal amount of rows that we can set in a chunk, and a maximal amount of rows for the chunk. That is like the most important thing that you need to take into account to speed up dumps and what we want in the future. Then for sure, use CSTD. That will speed up the dump always. It's incredibly fast. It reduces the 50% of the disk space compared with a non-compressed execution. So if you want to speed up dumps, just use STD. So, and how can we speed up the imports? So that's F will increase the amount of files. Yes, it's true. But it's also going to allow my loader to import in a multi-thread fashion. Why I'm saying about -F, if I already told you about -R in the previous one, well, -R is mostly for splitting the shops that are taking the data. That's -F, which is the file chunk, is going to allow you to always have the chunks that my loader needs to use a multi-threaded functionality. So and it's the same for you. So at the end, it's going to be really useful to set by default both variables. The other thing is just to disable the real log, but you need to take into account that this is not recommended to production, because you are executing the alter instance disable Innodb reader log, which could cause inconsistency if the database crashes. And of course, you need to use the correct configuration. You should set the Innodb flush method log to autoread, the Innodb autolog mode equals 2. The performance schema, you can disable the performance schema in order to reduce the overhead. Disable the bin logs or directly sync bin log equals 0. The Innodb flush log at transaction coming different to 1. You can disable the double write Innodb, and of course you can enlarge the Innodb log files. Some of these variables doesn't make sense if they use together, or if you are, for instance, disable the redo log. But depending on the case, you might want to use some of them. So, future releases, what we are going to be adding. The idea is to have a single file per table. This is something that people desire, and we are going to allow you to do this, but not inside MyLoader, which is going to be really complex to implement. So this is going to be done outside of MyLoader, like in a second step, using, and what says in the second line there is the pipe to another process. Actually, as we are allowing you to execute on MyLoader, on MyDumper, some external command after a file is being created. So you are going to implement with an easy script that I already wrote. You can implement a script that after a file is being written, you are going to moving the data to another file. So internally, we are not going to be implementing a single file per table, but we are going to give some kind of solution in order to do that with the pipe to another process. Then we want to improve the PNM text file collection. The implementation is good, but we want even to give the user more metrics. So that is some things that we are going to be doing in the future. We want to automatically determine when to use, when should not be using the Innodb optimized table keys, because, for instance, with tables that doesn't have minimum rows, we should be disabled that. So that is one to keep on MyDumper or MyLoader to be automatically done. So of course, this is something that I already told you, but the best chunk size per table. So we want to chunk or create the shops that chunks the data on the tables in a dynamic manner. So in order to be in terms of the query time, not on a static value, which is what we are doing right now. Right now, we estimate the chunk size, and we use the same chunk size all the time. If you have holes in the primary key, the amount of rows will be less. Could end up with empty files. In order to reduce that, we are modifying the chunk size. That is what we wanted to implement in the future. For sure, we want to refine the code. We want to have better testing. That is something we are already doing with Circle CI, and start using Masquerade on every release. We are targeting to develop the first stable release of MyDumper this year. We are not sure if we are going to be able to do it, but we are going to try. The release we were doing every 2 months. Right now, we decided to do it every 4 months because we want to focus on the testing and the quality of the code. So, expected performance gain. So when I started this talk, and this is about the future of MyDumper, I told you that we were going to be discussing about at the end is going to be two things, which were the use cases and the performance gains that we expect to have in the future. So in MyDumper will be very, very difficult because MyDumper is pretty fast from the beginning, and there is not much to do there because the only thing that I can think that we could add in order to improve the performance of MyDumper is to know which tables are in the Innodb of a pool and start with those tables, but that is not possible. So there is no way that we can know that. So they are not possible for that. The only thing is to improve the locking mechanism that we already have. And there are some opportunities there, just we need to still investigate in that, but that is the only thing that we can think of. So in terms of performance on MyDumper, there is not much, but there are a lot of things in terms of usability. So there are a lot of things that we need to implement, but not in terms of performance. In my loader, actually there are things, and they are difficult to explain, but actually they are related to how we can split the inserts that are inside the file in order to improve the performance. I mean, on each file we have multiple inserts, so probably executing in parallel will be faster, maybe not. We need to test those, and that is what we are going to be doing. We think that we might have an opportunity there in order to, in terms of performance. So we are going to be working on that on future releases. That is another reason why we are also adding PMM, in order to have metrics about the import times. So we are focusing mostly, our main focus is increase the quality of the code, as we know that we need to work with more people. We want other people to join to our project, and they need to understand the code in order to introduce new changes. Because usually when people want to be on the project, it's because they need a functionality that we don't have. So if we change the code in order to make it simpler to understand, more people is going to come. That is what we think. And of course, we want to add more use cases. So now that, for instance, right now, we are going to be able to execute other programs while MyDumper is running. This opens a lot of opportunities. Same that when we implement with the stream. So now, for instance, you will be able to use encryption. You are going to be merging the file. That's what we are already doing. I don't know, if you want to compress with not zip or other option, you are going to be able to do it. So now that opportunities are there, so you are going to be able to start using that. And there are those new use cases that what we are going to be focusing in the future. Okay, so that was it. As this is a recording, you might not be able to ask me anything. So just if you have any question or you have a bug that you want to report, just you can set that to the repo, or GitHub repository, and I will be happy to answer. I wanted to thank you all for watching. I wanted to thank also to Percona to give me the opportunity to present this talk, and to MyDumper community that every day helped me to build this tool and to make it better every day. Say thank you all and see you around.